Hello, everyone, and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm your host, Kathy Yang, and today I'm joined by Derrick Herndon. Derrick is a researcher at the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies, or CIMSS, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's also a veteran Navy forecaster, and he specializes in topics like remote sensing, hurricanes, weather forecasting, and more. Would you like to add anything to your bio?
Oh, no, I think you got it all there, Kathy, and congratulations for getting that acronym out. It's a mouthful for sure.
Yeah. Um, so let's just get started with like the basics. How did you get into meteorology and like what inspired your passion and like everything you do today?
Yeah, so I actually got into this interest at a very young age. Going back to like what would be my first memory of a memorable weather event, and a lot of people who are in this career have such a memory. For me, it was fishing in the Florida Keys with my father and my grandfather. We had set out on our boat to go out to fish on some of the reefs that were out there. And as is somewhat common actually in the Florida Keys, a water spout came down from one of the clouds a few miles away from us, this just black cloud, and this black spout kind of coming down all the way down to the ground to the water. And I was like, I'd never seen that before, and I was kind of freaking out. My grandfather told me, he goes, "Oh, that's just a water spout. It's actually fairly harmless. We see them all the time in South Florida." But I still was just really, really struck by that. And from that point forward, I just really started paying attention to the weather. Growing up in South Florida, typically you would have a lot of tropical cyclones, but growing up in the 70s down there, we were in what was kind of a hurricane drought. So we actually didn't have a lot of storms like that.
Mhm.
It wasn't until I moved further north to Tampa that I kind of got to see my first hurricane. But in the interim, I actually moved to Oregon for a few years, and just think about the contrast in weather between Miami,
Yeah.
like Portland, Oregon. So like I got like this, it was like such a different experience for me to see this very different kind of weather. And during that time, my dad, was really taking a keen interest in the fact that I was really interested in this and really fostered that for me. So he purchased me my first weather instrument kit.
Oh,
And I got that all installed, and then I started writing forecasts and putting them on the refrigerator every day. I started taking notes every single day, and I still have all my notes from those days. I have just reams and reams of notebooks filled with notes about windstorms and clouds and how the pressure changes and all that. And then I moved back to the Tampa area and got to actually experience my first hurricane, Hurricane Elena. And that just continued to just really fuel my interest, not just in weather, but I really started to kind of focus on my interest in hurricanes and tropical cyclones.
wow, it's crazy how like one event can like shape your passion and like drive you to like end up doing like forecasts and being part of this industry. It's really
Mhm.
cool. I live in the northeast section and I used to live actually in Texas and we
Hmm.
moved a few years before like Hurricane Harvey and that stuff. So I haven't thankfully experienced any hurricanes yet, but it sounds like it can be pretty interesting. Yeah.
It can be, from a weather interest standpoint. Obviously, these things are dangerous and even
Mhm.
deadly. So we don't want to take them lightly. But if you're interested in such things, they are a little exciting sometimes when you get to kind of experience them. Yeah. And,
Sounds
and thankfully, you missed Hurricane Harvey because that was a really, really bad
Yeah, that
hurricane.
one was like devastating, yeah. Um, so it sounds like you do a lot of like storm tracking and like I know from the camp that you do personal, like you've personally gone out and done storm chasing. So can you talk about some of those experiences and like some recommendations or advice you have?
Sure. Yeah. I spent, well, my first storm chasing trip was actually as soon as I could drive. I
Oh
started
wow.
storm
Wow,
chasing.
that's
So as soon as I could drive, I was like driving to go see storms and get closer to the storms. But the storms in Florida and the South are notoriously difficult to chase because there's lots of trees. The cloud bases are very, very low, so it's very difficult to see a lot of details. But It wasn't until I really moved out to the Omaha area, which is kind of in the heart of what's known as Tornado Alley. And I did a lot more storm chasing there. So chasing not hurricanes in this case, but actually severe weather. And I kind of did that for a couple of reasons. I was just interested. I'd seen I saw that water spout when I was very young, which
Yeah.
technically is a tornado um,
Oh.
on the water. But I kind of had this interest to kind of observe severe storms more closely. This also provides a service to the National Weather Service because the National Weather Service has radars that can observe these storms, but the radars can't tell them for certain if those storms are producing a tornado. So having a storm spotter on the scene, and I'm a qualified storm spotter, can report back to the National Weather Service and tell them, okay, this storm is rotating, but it doesn't have a tornado, or there is a tornado on the ground, and this is its location, and this is where it's moving. So I did quite a bit of that in the Omaha area, and I actually ran a group of students there as well. I had a group of young kids that we would take out, on these storm chasing trips to just kind of teach them how to do storm chasing safely, and also give them an opportunity to kind of experience that. From the safety perspective, and like what would I say to new storm chasers is, the thing about storm chasing is you really kind of need to understand the meteorology. Even trained meteorologists get sometimes trapped by these storms, and they know what's going on. And some have even died storm chasing, even though they knew exactly kind of what they were doing.
Mhm.
So really have to get an understanding of how to read the sky, how to know where storms are moving, um, and kind of get an understanding of how the weather works before you set out on and do this. The other thing I will say is go with someone who's experienced.
Yeah.
Be a navigator or be a co-driver or whatever, but go out with someone who kind of knows the ropes and has some experience doing this and kind of learn how to do it safely. Um, One of the things I saw as a storm chaser, I saw way too many people who didn't know the meteorology and were being quite reckless, to be honest.
Oh.
The problem with that is that they become a threat, actually. And as I teach in my classes, I said one of the biggest threats to storm chasing and storm chasers is
Other.
not the storms themselves. Now it's really other storm chasers and other people on the road. So
Hmm.
you got to be very careful with that. I'll just throw out a name here real quick. There are many people who do this and have great videos, but Picos Hank uh,
Yeah.
produces a number of tremendous, very good, high quality videos on how to do this safely. And I'm not an expert on that, but he is.
Wow, that sounds great. It's like a very risky like job, I guess, or an experience, but
Mhm,
very important for science, like keeping track of where the storm is, like you said, like
mhm.
radar and like remote sensing can't get like all the details. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And these videos have become actually very important for the science because we have a lot of theories for how these storms develop, but having the videos on site, kind of watching the entire evolution of tornado genesis, has really helped to kind of match that up to the theory of how
Mhm.
this works. So, yeah.
When you started like storm chasing, did you have a mentor or did you just like like just go with a buddy and yeah.
One of my first like long storm chasing trips I did, I went out to Texas and chased with a couple of experienced chasers who knew what they were doing, and that was very helpful for me, and I learned quite a bit from that. Um, I'm pretty risk averse. I don't need to get super close to a tornado. So I usually keep
Mhm.
a safe distance. But yeah, that first trip was interesting because we didn't see any tornadoes, but we saw what's called a haboob, which is like a big wind
Yeah,
storm.
I've heard of it.
It was like a wall of dust moving at like 50 to 60 miles per hour, and it overtook us actually. And we kind of were in and out of it for like an hour. It was pretty incredible. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I did go out with someone who kind of knew what they were doing. I definitely
Mhm.
recommend that.
Sounds great. So you've been tracking all these storms and hurricanes, tornadoes for like such a long time. Have you noticed any changes like during your career? Like, or just like, because climate change is like actively changing our world, like making the oceans warmer, favoring more intense hurricanes. Like, could you speak about that? And like, if you see any differences, like compared to before, and what does that mean for our planet and our future?
Yeah, well, I can speak a little bit to kind of the hurricane question because that's really what I study every day. There are a couple things that are important to know about hurricanes and climate, and one of those things is that our record of hurricanes is somewhat limited to the satellite era. Now we have records of hurricanes going back, hundreds of years, of course.
Hmm.
There have been a number of famous hurricanes that have impacted history in both Asia and in the North Atlantic as well. But in terms of like how many hurricanes occur each year in a particular place like the Atlantic Ocean, really satellite data is our best tool for that. And really, we really only have reliable satellite data from like the 1960s onward. So when we're looking for trends, when we talk about climate, we're talking about 30-year averages. So when we're looking for trends, we have to keep in mind that the data that we're looking for in these trends, these data sets, we have to be careful with that. That
Hmm.
said, we do have a pretty good idea now what we think is happening in terms of the climate change, effect on hurricanes. And when I say climate change, I'm talking about, warming of the oceans, warming of the atmosphere, which is, very not controversial at this point among scientists.
Yeah.
It's easy to observe. Almost anybody who lives anywhere for any length of time will tell you that things are warmer. I live in Wisconsin, and I can tell you, even people who live here say, that the frosts are coming later and warming up earlier, and
Hmm.
farmers will tell you this too as well. So, with all that said, what would we expect the impact on hurricanes to be? Well, hurricanes are heat engines. They derive their energy from heat, and specifically the heat of the ocean. So, the
Yeah.
warmer the ocean is, the more energy the hurricane has to use. And there's a pretty easy direct relationship between the amount of heat content in the ocean and the potential intensity that a storm can get. So we have definitely seen an upward trend in the amount of thermal energy available to these hurricanes.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't changes going on in other parts of the atmosphere. There are changes in the upper part of the atmosphere that might counter that to some degree. So
Hmm.
one thing we have been able to observe is one thing we know is we don't see like an increase in the number of storms.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that, right? They think, oh, well, global warming, there's got to be more hurricanes. Well, not necessarily because of those things that are going on in the upper part of the atmosphere. And those could also be impacting where these storms form. And can cause them to maybe not develop as much. So we don't see like a really a strong increase in the number of storms. There might be a slight uptick in the number of storms in the Atlantic, but we've seen decreases actually potentially
Oh.
in other parts of the world. What we have observed and we think is pretty clear is we think that these storms are getting more intense. So we rate hurricanes on the Saffir-Simpson scale from category 1 up to category
Hmm.
5. Category 5 being the absolute
Wow.
strongest, and we do think that these storms are attaining these higher intensities more often, and they might be doing it at a faster rate. That is another thing that we think we might be observing is that how quickly a storm goes from, say, a category 1 to a category 5, that might be increasing as well. And then finally, I'll say that in a warmer climate, we do have a tendency to evaporate more moisture into the air. So the air holds more moisture in a moisture
Oh,
state, water
yeah.
vapor state. And that might be, and seems to be likely producing higher rainfall amounts from these tropical cyclones, either from just the amount of moisture that's in the atmosphere, but also we think that some of the storms are slowing down a little bit. And it's that storm motion actually that's really more important. And there's no correlation between storm intensity and rainfall. There have been storms that have been on the very lowest end of the scale, even only tropical storms that have produced devastating rainfalls,
Yeah.
whereas Category 5 hurricanes have produced, maybe 6 inches or so, which is bad but not catastrophic. The big difference is how fast those storms are moving. And it makes sense if you had a thunderstorm that formed over the top of your house and just sat there and rained the whole time, you would get a lot more rain than a thunderstorm that was passing by you at like 50 miles per hour.
Oh,
So the slowing down of these storms and the rainfall are things that we think that are have been changing a bit over time.
wow, that's like a lot of changes actually. But yeah, I've heard it's like a common misconception that the amount of storms is increasing when in reality it's not, and like it's actually the intensity that's increasing. So,
Yep, that's what we think. And again, using the satellite record primarily for that because we have a much better ability to observe the intensity of storms on the planet now.
Speaking of satellite data, like how do beginners get started with analyzing satellite data? Because it's pretty pretty tricky. And like what resources and like specific applications like would you recommend?
Well, I mean, you're lucky because it's a lot easier now than it was when I was younger, right? You know,
Hmm.
we didn't have the tremendous number of tools that are available and easily accessible now than before. In fact, it's really interesting. I work with, young students, high school students, and even younger, and they're already doing things that were challenges for us as scientists, just cracking open a file of data from a satellite image
Hmm.
what could be a challenge and took a little bit of effort. But now there it's a lot easier. For one thing, we have standardization, right? So we have much better standards on how to create this data. So when you go to process data from one satellite, you probably have the tools to process data from another one because the data is all in similar formats. And that's super, super helpful, I think, for young scientists. The other thing is there's a lot more repositories of this code. So places like GitHub, places like that are repositories for code to open up these satellite files and begin to immediately start looking at an image. There's just a certain amount of excitement, like when you're writing this code or working on this code, and then like you hit the enter button, and like a picture pops up of a satellite image, and you're like, oh my God, I did it. It's a lot easier to do that now than it was, but so I would say that GitHub's a really good tool. I can also send you some links to some other tools online that you can put in the comment section or discussion section of this video that would provide your listeners with access to some of those tools. I would say, for young scientists, Python's pretty popular right now. There are other
Yeah.
types of code that are very popular. And there are many, many, many tutorials online now to get you going with that. And of course, you have ChatGPT now, and these AI tools that when you get stuck, um, which I get stuck sometimes, even still. So, and I do use those tools from time to time to kind of get me over the hump and help me kind of crack whatever issue I'm dealing with. So, I would say that there are many many repositories now out there of satellite data that young scientists can get their hands on, and the code is out there and available. And again, I can provide you some of those links.
Yeah, sounds awesome. Like yeah, ChatGPT and like AI can definitely help a lot now. I think like you said, it's a lot easier since even like 20 years ago and like since satellites have started like
Mhm.
a few decades ago. Like I
Yep.
know a bunch of high schoolers who are like very easy to work on projects and because it's so accessible on the internet.
Yes, and there are a number of classes that you can take online to learn this as well. So
Mhm.
I'll just give a shout out for that too.
Thank you so much for Derek for joining us today at Climate Conversations. I learned so much from you, and it's awesome to see the trends and changes in our weather today. I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.